Thank you, all of you, for joining this morning. As ORHMA members, it's our great pleasure to bring on one of the series of webinars that we are going to be doing, focusing on workplace health and safety. And today's one is focusing on occupational health and safety. And we have a special guest from the Ministry of Labor, Jules. Let's get started. I will do a quick intro of who Jules is. So Jules Ansgray is currently the Director of Occupational Health and Safety Branch at the Ministry of Labor, Training and Skills Development. The Occupational Health and Safety Branch, OHSB, develops compliance assistance and enforcement strategies for program under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, OSHA, and provide strategic and technical implementation support to the field and the ministry. Jules joined the Ministry of Labor in 2005 and has progressed through a variety of roles. He began as an industrial health and safety inspector in the Western region, and since then has held several positions in the ministry in the Operations, Policy and Prevention Division. Prior to joining government, he worked in private sector as a health and safety coordinator and in various manufacturing facilities and laboratories. So it is our great pleasure to have Jules, who is the Director of Occupational Health and Safety Branch with the Ministry of Labor, here to share with us some of the compliance requirement for occupational health and safety, especially focusing on the hospitality sector. So thanks to ORHMA for allowing us to host this webinar to their members, and what they have asked us is to do a series of webinars. So Forest Consulting Services, and I'll do a quick intro of myself, has partnered with ORHMA since 2018 as their exclusive health and safety partner to bring forward health and safety support for their membership. What does it mean? So Forest Consulting Services has been in business since 2004 as a consulting, training, and software support provider for Ontario businesses as well as businesses across Canada. We have over 65 full-time staff serving many different sectors and industries across the country. Majority of our clients have been in the Ontario province, and we have been working with ORHMA to take strategic programs and solutions forward. One of those initiatives is e-learning, bundle e-learning for mandatory training. Every employee in Ontario have certain obligations, which Jules is going to touch in his presentation this morning, especially obligations under the Occupational Health and Safety Act and your compliance requirement as an employer. So any help that you need, we are here to support ORHMA and its members with proper tools, guidance, and solutions. So with that, I'm passing the baton back to Jules for him to take us through his presentation this morning. Thank you, Jules.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate the invitation here today. 4S is a really valued partner in the occupational health and safety system. I've known them for years in a variety of roles I've had in the ministry, and they're a really strong partner. And they show the value of having a broad network of people with expertise who are trying to support business. The ministry can't do it on its own. And we play a role. It's an important role of kind of setting the framework, but it's really the system broadly and organizations like 4S that really help that support the employers in the workplace. We go in, we write orders, and we walk away, and people are like, what do I do now? How do I fix my system? How do I comply with the orders? And organizations like 4S, we really appreciate their partnership in working with us and in supporting workplaces like yourselves. So so I'll share my screen. All right, perfect. Sorry about that. Okay, so I was just going to say thanks again so much for the invite. Really appreciate being able to meet with members of ORHMA. You're a really key organization for us in the sense of you represent members across the province that we really want to be able to say, how can we get the message out, talk and have an open door about health and safety, and really support you and your members in being successfully safe workplaces. I'm not going to go through all the slides today because I'm going to give an overview of kind of some high level items that I think will be of most importance to you. And then I want to leave some time for questions as well. But the rest of the slides will be there for, if you want to look at in future, because I'm happy for the slide deck to be shared. So I'm going to skip vision, mission, and all that. I do want to just reference here because there is a large health and safety system. As I mentioned, I first met for us if you see that yellow circle, training providers. So this is the mandatory training we do. They were one of our earliest approved training providers. They do a lot more than training, as all of you know, but that's our first interaction with them. When we first said, we're going to set a high bar for who can do training, we started with working at Heights and Joint Health and Safety Committee training. And 4S was one of the early people in with a high quality program with regards to the training. And they provide much broader support. So we see them as a system. Like the ministry obviously sets a role, but there's a lot of players in the system, and we appreciate that partnership. So what's our role? So one is our role is really, you see the third row down there is that we set, communicate, and enforce the standards. That's very simply what we do. So we set the baseline. And I think I want to highlight that it is the baseline. Like the Occupational Health and Safety Act, often people call it the Green Book, is the bare minimum. We encourage employers to go above and beyond in many cases, and yet we're not actually really allowed to go there. My role is to say, here's what's legally required, and this is the bar you have to meet. But I'm also impressed that a lot of people in the health and safety system don't just rest their laurels on, hey, we've met the minimum standards. A lot of employers, including yourselves, say, how could we do even better? How could we push the limits? And that's where, again, partners in the system really can help with that as well. We've realized that Ontario, as you see in the top row there, is one of the safest jurisdictions in the Canada and in the world. So it's something to be proud of. And that's not because of the ministry. The ministry does set the rules, but it's workplaces and workplace parties like employers and supervisors and workers and constructors and owners all working together that make a workplace truly safe. Our role is the check on the system. We cannot be in every workplace. So we use like risk-based metrics and data and all of that to kind of figure out where we should go and what targets we should be looking at, what hazards we should be looking at. But in most cases, you're going to go by your day and you're not going to see us. You're not safe because of us. We've set the rules, but it's really you taking it in and implementing it and making part of your culture that makes a workplace safe. And so we realize that. So when we see that Ontario has the lowest lost time injury rate of any other province since 2009, that's a kudo to the system that's supporting, but especially the workplaces who are doing the doing of making a workplace safe. And that's really the underlying philosophy, which is what we call the internal responsibility system. And that's, a system where everyone has a responsibility kind of appropriate to their role. The employer, yes, has the key responsibilities, but as supervisors, workers, all the other workplace parties also play a really key role. Our role is not to hold your hand and be there every day. It's to set that framework, try to provide as much communication and support, create a system of training providers and all the other things that support workplaces to help you succeed. And we really do that through our Chief Prevention Officer strategy. So Dr. Joel Moody is the Chief Prevention Officer, and his strategy kind of sets the framework for the whole system. And that's the strategy. I won't go through all the pillars, but there's basically a number of objectives, and you can look at those later. But it's using a variety of tools. Compliance and enforcement, which I'll be speaking about mostly today, is one tool. It's a prevention tool. There's a lot of other tools that are all in place, from training to awareness to education to incentives to help make workplaces safer. So many of you may be familiar with this, but I wanted to make sure, because I wasn't sure who would be in the audience. I want to start with just the framework of what is the OSHA? What is the Occupational Health and Safety Act? A high-level overview so that you understand what we see it as and what that framework is that I've been speaking about. So really, it sets out the powers, it sets out the requirements, and it sets out the rights related to occupational health and safety in the province of Ontario. And that covers most workers in the province. So we've got about 450,000 workplaces that fall under OSHA and about 6 million or so workers. Now, obviously, ORHMA, you represent a good portion. You are a large sector, and one that we very much care about and want to support. But there's many other sectors that this OSHA covers as well. Most workers fall under provincial jurisdiction, not federal jurisdiction. So we do have the bulk of workers and the bulk of workplaces in the province following under this OSHA scheme. So really, as I mentioned workplace parties. OSHA really sets out what are the duties for them? What are the duties for employers, for constructors, for owners, supervisors, directors, and officers of corporations, and also for workers. All of them have duties. And I would say, while all have duties, as I've said earlier, the more power you have in the workplace, the more duties are on you. So employers do have by far the bulk of the responsibilities for making sure health and safety is successfully implemented in a workplace. But we do, as I said, hold supervisors and workers also to account for making sure they follow the duties required of them. There is 3 rights for workers, and these rights apply to all workers, including supervisors. The employer as a person, if it's a person, not a corporation, is also a worker. All of you have the right to know about health and safety, the right to refuse unsafe work, and the right to participate in how to make a safe workplace. One of the key things for that participation piece is our requirements to have, if you have over 20, a joint health and safety committee, 20 workers or more. And if you have between 6 and 19 workers, a health and safety representative. That's one of the key ways where people can participate in the health and safety. I mentioned earlier that the ministry's role is kind of being a check on the internal responsibility system. So we don't do it for you. We expect workplace parties working together to make their workplaces safe. We come in and we're kind of that auditor, that check on the system. But we've also created these 2 roles of health and safety representatives and joint health and safety committees to be the internal check on the system. So they also are not responsible for making your workplace safe. It's the employers, the supervisors, the workers, the ones I've been mentioning, but they play a key role of being that internal check for you. That's why if you look at a joint health and safety committee, for instance, they have many of the powers of an inspector. They have the power to inspect your workplace once a month. They have the power to demand documents from the employer. They have the power to make recommendations for improving health and safety in the workplace. And we've done that on purpose so that there's this internal check to help you. And so it's a really key thing to foster and support your joint health and safety committees or your health and safety representatives. And part of that with JHSCs, of course, is there's mandatory training that's required from approved training providers like 4S or others. The other thing that's really important is that there's a prohibition on reprisals against workers, and that is those rights I mentioned above. If a worker tries to use those rights, they want to know about a hazard, they say, I'd like to participate in health and safety, or I'm refusing this work, I feel it's unsafe. A reprisal in any way is not allowed. And I want you to really understand a reprisal doesn't just mean something like discipline or firing. It could be something more subtle, like you say, you know what? Because you keep complaining about health and safety, you're on night shift from now on. That could be a reprisal from the ministry's viewpoint. So we take this very seriously. Reprisals put a complete chilling effect on people actually being safe in the workplace. So I really caution, and this is where, to be honest, as employers, you might be, I understand this, but your supervisors might not know this and they might go beyond. So it's important to communicate to your supervisors. Reprisals in any way are not allowed. And importantly, I think I want to highlight this with the right to refuse unsafe work, is it's the worker alone who's going to say, I don't feel safe. Now, I'll be honest, in the end of the day, we might come in because there's a complaint and we might say, worker, you're wrong. Actually, this is not a hazard. But you can't reprise against them even after that. You can't say, you were wrong, now I'm punishing you. They are legitimately have the right to refuse, even if they've made a mistake about whether it's truly hazardous or not. The role of an employer is to work with them, investigate, say, okay, you're worried about this. And if it's not a hazard, to say, here's why it's not, and here's why you're safe. And in most cases, that is enough. And that it doesn't escalate there. And they say, thank you so much for looking into it. I feel safer now. I appreciate you showing me how to work safely with this job or this task or this chemical or whatever it is. But if you do get stuck at a loggerheads and they still feel unsafe, and you're not able to resolve the issue, that's where the ministry must be involved and an inspector must attend. And we will look into the heart of the matter to really say, is there a likelihood to endanger or not? And again, don't be afraid of the ministry and don't be afraid of the inspector. Our role is to come in, yes, to look for, do we find non-compliance? But at the end of the day, we're really trying to help you get to success with your health and safety system. So when we write an order, for instance, to fix something, guard a machine or to do WMIS training, that's not punitive. We're just saying, hey, you've just had a free health and safety consultant called an inspector come up and they've pointed you in the direction of what you need to fix. Again, we don't help you solve it. We're not your health and safety system consultant. We're going to point you what needs to be fixed, and then you either need to fix it yourself or find supports in the system, which are in the resources or organizations like 4S can help you with. As well, there are additional duties that are really key, like workplace violence and harassment. That is one that is really growing in all sectors, but it is especially as well in your sector as well. We do inspect employers to have a plan in place, a policy and a program in place with regards to harassment and how they're going to try to mitigate it. And that includes harassment that might come from the clients. Basically having a policy where you're going to not accept harassment of your staff or other things like that. That's something you need to look into because we will ask those questions when we come in if there are complaints about harassment. The Act also sets what the inspector powers are, what we can do and can't do, and what authority we have to make regulations. So what kind of tools do we have? So I've mentioned these just briefly on the slide before. A common tool is administrative orders. So this is an order to say, by such and such a date, please fix this. Or sometimes we'll say it was fixed in front of us. So that's called a forthwith order. We have orders where we're going to say, you know what, this part of the workplace might be dangerous. Don't want you to enter it. That's called a barrier order. But I think the key one, and not used as often, is a stop work order. And that's where we see something that's basically immediately hazardous or very likely to be immediately hazardous. And we'll say, stop right now, stop this thing. And this work cannot continue until this issue is fixed. So we use all the different orders really based on the level of risk and the level of severity. So for example, if I walked into one of your workplaces and saw you don't have a joint health and safety committee. Okay, that's an important tool. I've told you about why it's really important to have one. We would write an order for the employer to put in place a joint health and safety committee. It would be a time-based order. We'd say within a month or so, whatever it would be, put in place a joint health and safety committee. We're not going to do stop work on that. No one's going to immediately die because there's not a JHSC. We know it's very important, but we're not trying to get in the way of you doing your business. If I did, though, walk in and saw someone working with extremely hazardous chemicals, no gloves, no personal protective equipment, no training, I might do a stop work order to say, this work is not going to happen until there's PPE, until there's training and all of that that's appropriate. So we really gauge the type of tool we use to the hazard that's in front of us. We also do have the ability to write tickets. They're called Part 1 offense notices, but they're like tickets, much like parking tickets that you might be more familiar with. And those are written for when we're kind of ratcheting it up. Maybe we've gone in, we've written an order before, we've come in again and the same issue is there. So we're realizing, okay, the order was not enough. We gave you a non-financial penalty. We just said, please fix this by such and such a date. And yet we've gone in again and you're doing it again. And so that's where we're going to use that progressive enforcement and maybe use a Part 1 ticket. And then the more serious tool is the Part 3 prosecution. So this is a full prosecution where we would be taking you to court. And these we reserve for very serious matters. So a fatality in the workplace, a very serious critical injury, or repeated non-compliance. So like again and again and again, we've gone in the workplace and you're just not cooperating. And we use these tools very carefully. We prefer, to be honest, a friendly approach, a compliance assistance approach. That is the primary approach the inspectors want to do. We know that in many workplaces, why there isn't, when we see non-compliance, it's not because it's willful in most cases, it's because you just didn't know what to do. And we understand that. And that's again why I say, please go to organizations that can help you set up your health and safety system. But we do understand that when we're writing an order, it's basically a guide to say, please fix this. If you then fix it, we're all good. The ministry is happy. You're not in any bad book. The order's been complied with and we move on. And I'm happy to say that about 99.2% of orders are complied with. So most workplaces, they comply. That's the positive thing. There is that 1% or so that are kind of try to refuse. That's where we pull out the bigger tools and use them as appropriate. A lot of people say, well, what's a fine? So individual person, we can fine an individual person up to $500,000 for each infraction. So basically, you don't have a JHSC, that could be up to 500,000. You don't have guarding on your machine, and that could be another 500. You don't use chemicals safely, that could be another 500. Each charge that we would do in a Part 3 prosecution could theoretically end up to 500,000. Now, the fee is set by the judge, and it's done after a trial based on the severity and a whole bunch of factors the judge takes into account, including the size of the workplace. They believe larger workplaces have a greater ability to pay than smaller, etc. So, but just so you know, it's up to 500,000 for an individual, and actually we can also get jail time. So up to 12 months of prison upon conviction per infraction. That is not used that often, but a few people have gone to jail for health and safety. Contraventions, just so you know. As well, for corporations themselves, the fine is up to $1.5 million for a corporation upon conviction. And again, that's per infraction. So if we charge you for 3 things, it could be 1.5 times 3, depending. So, there's some pretty serious fines there. Again, those are there not to scare people, but just to say this is how important it is. We think if people, after all the help, after orders, after all of that, and things are still going wrong, we have these pretty big tools in place to try to encourage a workplace to get into compliance and create a safe workplace. So I mentioned a little bit about the health and safety representatives and JHSCs. I won't go through this whole slide, but as I said, they have many of the powers of an inspector, actually, and it's important that an employer supports them, nurtures them, allows them to do their job, basically. HSRs, like the health safety reps, have almost all the powers of a JHSC, slightly different in that they don't have a committee, so there's no place, they're not going to meet quarterly, and they don't have to keep minutes because it's one person. And they can't initiate a work stoppage because a work stoppage is where the committee themselves, employer and worker, both stop work. So I won't go again through all this slide, but you're going to often see if it's the first time we've been to your workplace and we don't have a history with you, we're going to sit down with you and kind of do a lot of what we call the administrative review, as where we're going to say, do you have a copy of the Occupational Health and Safety Act? Have you done mandatory awareness training? Do you have a joint health and safety committee? All these bare bone things that are part of the framework that every workplace should have, regardless of the hazards they have. Once we've done that and kind of reviewed, do you have the committee? We might even ask to review the minutes of your joint health and safety committee. Maybe we might ask about, oh, I see the committee has been talking about the same issue for a year. What are you doing about that? That's how deep we might go into. So be ready to have minutes available when an inspector comes, because otherwise, you could get an order saying, you shall create minutes and you shall have minutes, because it's something we're going to be looking for to see that your JHSC is actually functioning. So I want to talk about some of the specific hazards. These won't be relevant to all of you, but ORHMA covers, restaurants, hotels, motels, and it is one of the sectors we do pay attention to, and we are tracking both complaints and injuries that come into the ministry, but we also do have track what makes claims to the WSIB, and we're looking at frequency and all of that. So the things that really are catching our attention in your sector, and why I'm sharing this with you is this is kind of a heads up for you to go back to your workplace, meet with your health safety rep or your JHSC, meet with your supervisors, and say, so Jules came and he talked about these are the issues that they're seeing in our sector. Are we good? Do we have things in place? Do we have controls in place for these things? So slips, trips, and falls. And not all of these are like as serious as like could cause a fatality, but they're causing injuries as well. So it's a mix of things that could cause severe injuries for all the way from minor injuries to severe injuries and fatality. So slips, trips, and falls continues to be an issue of concern, from floor surfaces in kitchens or from the use of ladders and stools. And we're seeing a lot of injuries from that. We're seeing burns and scalds, especially obviously in the restaurant sector with the hot surfaces, open flames, and boiling liquids. We're seeing cuts and lacerations from knives and cutting tools, slicers. We're seeing the lack of appropriate training and PPE in how to use some of these tools like slicers and knives. We're seeing a lot of ergonomic strains. So basically lifting of heavy objects, overloading of trays and carts, or the handling of laundry is causing musculoskeletal disorders, what we call ergonomic strains. And then we're seeing biological hazards. So handling of waste, hygiene practices with laundry, hygiene practice with regards to cleaning, all of that. There can be biological hazards that need to be controlled. As well, there can be actually hearing. We're seeing a lot of hearing loss claims where there's heavy, loud equipment, such as washers and dryers, causing hearing loss. Violence I mentioned as well, violence and harassment. So we're seeing you definitely, and you're on the front line in dealing with customers and clients who can unfortunately get aggressive. And so we're really looking to say, do you have a plan in place for the safety and security of your staff? Do you have a workplace violence and harassment program? Do you assess it every year to make sure it's still relevant? If you have a complaint, for instance, about harassment, do you investigate it? We expect you to investigate it and look into it. And that's something an inspector will show up and ask. Basically, the first thing, if we get a harassment complaint made to us, we're going to show up and say, hey, employer, show me your investigation. What did you do? Or did you just ignore this? And ignoring it is not acceptable, even if, and this is important, if you feel you can do an investigation and find there was no merit to it, that's okay. But you have to do the investigation. You can't just ignore it. Needle stick hazards actually from the handling of laundry or collecting of garbage, the cleaning in restrooms. Unfortunately, people are throwing needle sticks where they should not. Something you really need to consider. And if someone, a worker, finds a needle stick, you should have a process in place of what do you do? How do you handle it? Because unfortunately, there's quite a number of hazards that can come from needle sticks, including infectious diseases that you do not want your staff to get. As well, electrical equipment hazards have been an issue of concern, especially near wet surfaces. So something to pay attention to. And then the last one in all of your sectors is chemical exposure, mostly from either cleaning materials or chlorine in pools. So you need to make sure people understand the substances they're working with. I know a lot of people think, well, people clean at home, but sometimes the cleaning solutions and chemicals you're using can be actually quite more significant of a hazard, the ones you buy in bulk for commercial purposes. So you need to make sure if it's a WHMIS substance that people have the appropriate WHMIS training, etc., that if they need to wear gloves, they understand how to read a material safety data sheet or a safety data sheet, they're called now. Know that, if I need gloves, do I need eye protection, all of that with regards to chemical exposure. So that's something, and obviously there could be even more hazards than that, but these are the key ones I think are relevant to your sector you should be thinking about. We also have some hazard alerts, which this slide deck will be shared with you, so you can click on these, but these are ones relevant to your sector, including ergonomics in the workplace that we've talked about, some of our compliance initiatives and all of that, taking you to further information. So I want to talk a little bit now in a day in the life of an inspector. What do we do? I know people say, how do you choose where you're going to go? What is it you're focusing on right now relevant to my sector? If an inspector shows up, what is it they're going to be looking for right now? And so I'll step back and quickly describe. We do three types of field visits. We do inspections, which is where we're proactively, as we call it, showing up. So that means nothing's gone wrong. We're not there because there's been a complaint. We're not there because there's been an injury. We are using risk-based data and metrics to choose workplaces. So what we do is we go and comb to a really minute degree in the data to see what kind of workplaces are getting injuries, what kind of workplaces are getting illnesses, what kind of workplaces are seeing violence and harassment. And what we do is we categorize those workplaces, and then we go, okay, workplaces with these characteristics seem to be having this issue. So we, in a given year, will visit workplaces that look like those, even if we haven't yet had a complaint, to say, hi, I'm here before something's gone wrong. I just want to make sure everything's in place. Workplaces like yours are experiencing chemical issues, or workplaces like yours are experiencing harassment issues, for example, and we show up to make sure, do you have a system in place to deal with these? That, to me, is the greatest value of an inspector. Nobody wants an injury or an illness or fatality, and that means workplaces as well. I've never met an employer who's like, yeah, I don't care about workers. I want my workers to get hurt. I've never met such a work. People might say that. It's not true. It's devastating to a workplace to have an injury, even more devastating to have a fatality. It affects everyone, sometimes for the rest of their life. The main thing is that when you're so busy trying to run your business, which we know is super important, you've got payroll, you've got everything else that you're trying to do, you're trying to serve your customers, it's hard sometimes to pay attention to health and safety, make sure you have everything in place. That's why we show up to say, hi, we're going to show up here. We want to make sure workplaces like yours are having these issues, and we want to make sure you've got everything in place before something goes wrong. So that is our primary role for our proactive inspections. We do also do investigations, and that's what we call an event in our world, or a reactive visit. And that's when there's been that injury, or there's been a fatality, or there's been an occupational disease claim, or there's been a complaint or a work refusal. We do show up and we focus in on rectifying those issues. And in those visits, often we will be very focused just on what the complaint's about. So I mentioned earlier, like we might go through all your JHSC minutes, we might do that. That's more on that proactive inspection side. When we're reactive, if I've got a complaint that there is harassment going on in the workplace and it's being ignored, we're going to go in and really dig deep in how are you handling harassment. We might not look at the other issues, but we might. It depends. The inspector might end up doing a walk around of your workplace just to see how things are doing. And once we see something, we can't ignore it. If I see a chemical hazard, even though I'm there for harassment, I'm going to have to deal with it. So it's kind of basically on a case-by-case basis. But we're using all those tools, basically those inspections and the investigations, to really try to improve that health and safety, all with this prevention lens. The last type of visit we don't do it as often, is a consultation. So sometimes a workplace may actually want to invite us in, say, listen, we're instituting a new system, we're instituting new use of new chemicals or a new machine, and I'd love the minister to come in and kind of give me some high level thoughts about how OSHA applies. We're not gonna be your engineering consultant, get in and roll our sleeves up and install the machine for you. That's not our role, and other people in the health and safety system can do that. But if you want to know how does the Health and Safety Act apply to something you're going to do, and you'd like some advice, we're happy to come and do what's called a consultation. We don't do a lot because not a lot of people want to invite the inspector in, and I get that, but it is something we can do for you. Okay, so I've kind of explained the proactive campaigns, so I won't go through all of this. Basically, I'm going to go now into this proactive piece. So the proactive piece is really, that's where we're using a prevention-based approach, trying to get into the workplaces where we're seeing hazards, we're seeing issues, and we want to get there before something's gone wrong. It has two phases. One is an education outreach and awareness phase, and that's where we work with the entire health and safety system. So we work health safety associations, we work with partners like 4S to really get the word out to say, the ministry has got this on its radar. The ministry may be knocking on your door. You should be prepared. And that's why we want to really let people know what's on our radar, so you can check and say, are we good? Do we have things in place? We don't actually want a gotcha culture. I don't want to show up and find non-compliance. If I show up and everything's good, that's success. That means a workplace has things in place, and that to me means there's a much greater likelihood of improved health and safety in that workplace. So that's why we tell people what we're doing in advance. And it's funny because sometimes people have asked me, Jules, why don't you surprise people? Then you'll see what it's really like. But the thing is that I'd rather someone fix their system because they pause, look at it when they see guidance and support and compliance assistance, and fix it themselves. That's a successful workplace. That's where they've embedded health and safety into their culture and they're fixing it themselves. The other piece is that by me communicating out what we're going to be doing, where we're going to be going, we can actually potentially improve health and safety in a much greater amount of workplaces. I mentioned earlier there's 450,000 workplaces. That's a lot of workplaces. We have 500 inspectors. That's the biggest inspectorate in history in Canada. It's the biggest of any province. So that's something to be proud of. But do the math, 500, 450,000. We can't visit every workplace. So our goal is to try to get workplaces to use the internal responsibility system and fix themselves. We will be showing up at a subset of workplaces, but we cannot visit them all. So we want you to take the ball and run with it where we can. We will check and use data to try to pick workplaces, but we'll never visit everywhere. So if we can, through communication and compliance assistance, improve health safety, that is a real success to us. The second piece is, after that education about what we're going to be doing, what we're going to be looking at, is us doing the inspections, checking for compliance with the legislation, and also using the inspector as a compliance and education tool as well to point you in the direction of areas you may need to look at. Again, we don't solve your problems. We're not your consultant. We're going to point you in the direction. We're going to say A, B, C, and D, you need to look at a little deeper. I suggest, you find either, roll up your sleeves and figure it out yourselves if you're competent to do that, or go find someone in the health and safety system to help you on that. So we're going to be looking at that compliance. We're going to be looking at hazards, like identifying specific hazards to your workplace. We're going to be looking at what policies and programs do you have in place? Do you have ones on health and safety? Do you have ones for violence and harassment? we're going to be asking questions about the internal responsibility system. A key one would be, do your supervisors know they actually have health and safety responsibilities? And that's a key weakness. And I want to highlight that is employers may actually have a relatively good system on paper. I've seen this before. You've got the written policy, you've got a program in place, it looks good on paper. And then I do the simple thing as an inspector, and I show up and I ask a supervisor, "Oh, what would you do if a workplace safety complaint came to you or whatever?" And they're literally like, "Oh, I have no idea. That's not my job. My job is scheduling the kitchen, or my job is meeting customers and clients." If you're a supervisor and have staff reporting to you, you instantly have legal responsibilities under the Occupational Safety Act. That's a key thing, is making sure you support your supervisors, because the worst thing for them is to get that surprise where no one has ever told me this. What do you mean I could be charged as a supervisor? And there's some pretty responsibilities. We actually expect supervisors to do everything reasonable in the circumstances to protect the health and safety of their workers. So that's why it's key. And then the last thing is we'll be looking at the JHSC. I'm going to jump ahead. These are our current campaigns, and you guys fall for us in the industrial sector. So material handling is the key thing we're looking at. And that's a simple and it's simple term, but a broad one, which is if you are moving anything, a widget, laundry, binders, chairs from point A to point B, we are seeing an increasing trend of injuries that are concerning to us. Stuff falling over. People have propped something up against the walls, falling and crushing workers, or falling and hitting them on the head, knocking them unconscious. We're seeing all different issues across the board with material handling. So it's funny because it's not a new hazard. It's not some new sexy hazard that's been invented. Oh, people are worried. What about AI or nanotechnology? It's literally something we've done for centuries, moving a product or thing from A to B. And yet for some reason, I think we're seeing people are either cutting corners or they're rushing or whatever's happening. They don't have the right tools, a wheeled cart to move things, whatever it is. The injuries, whether they're ergonomic or critical or traumatic, are seeing is on the increase with regards to material handling, including up to death in some cases of being crushed by things falling over, people putting stuff on shelving that the shelving then collapses. So we're really asking people to pay attention in the industrial sector to that. And this is across the board. Part of it too, and I mentioned this, is that a key thing is you might have a good system in place, but what we're also seeing, and this OSHA, and I'm going into best practice here, but OSHA doesn't speak to complacency or human behavior. It just says employers shall, supervisors shall, workers shall. But when we start to put the lens on and that area of like, why are things breaking down, even when it looks like things are good on paper, is this complacency piece. And this is a key one where if people do things for a while and it doesn't go wrong, they start to believe, oh, I can do this safely. And so this is something where we're encouraging you to do, whether it's safety talks or regular touch bases with your team or other ways to kind of put it front and center, the importance that you have to keep the eye on the ball, that part of the job is making your widgets, serving clients. That's number one, but to do it safely at the same time, and that you actually require it as an employer, that to serve clients must be done, but must be done safely, for instance. That's something that needs to be embedded in, because what we're finding is that without these reminders, there's a lot of complacency and people just forget about it. They get distracted. And then through that distraction, through that complacency, through the cutting corners, because I've done it this way 100 times and it never went wrong, that's where the data is showing in many cases, that's where the injury is coming from. So we need to really help people stay engaged on health and safety issues. So lastly, I wanted to talk about some recent legislative updates that you may have seen in the news. Not all of them are relevant to your sector. One of them is requiring, not relevant to your sector, but menstrual products be provided at construction projects. But the new ones that are going to be relevant to your sector is requiring clean washrooms, so requiring washrooms to be clean and sanitary in all sectors. We've required this in construction for years, but we actually didn't ever have a law saying that in a restaurant or in a hotel. Public health has separate rules, so there's an overlapping jurisdiction there. But these would be washrooms. Public health is concerned when there's washrooms that are available to the public. That's why it's public health. This new washroom requirement is going to be on all washrooms, including ones solely for workers. So even if it's not available to the public, we will be looking to say, is it clean? Is it sanitary? And then not yet passed, but we're going to be soon saying we're actually going to require you to maintain records of that cleaning as well, and we'll be looking for those records. So you're going to see more on this. This just got royal assent on October 28th. There's guidance being developed that we'll be sending out on this so that you'll know more about it, so you know what it is required. What we're going to even get into, what does clean and sanitary mean? I know a lot of people say, what does that mean? Are you like looking with a magnifying glass? Are you going to use a black light like they use in CSI? First off, no, we're not going to be using a black light. I can assure you of that, but we will be giving guidance on that. And so that's a key thing to pay attention to. The other one is we're modernizing the definition of harassment to include protection against virtual harassment. So today we're all here talking via Zoom. What we had is in the OSHA, right at the beginning, it talks about where OSHA applies, and it says it does not apply in a home at the beginning. So inspectors do not have authority to enter someone's personal residence. We can knock on the door if they run their business from there and ask to come in. People will say, well, welcome, come on in. I'll talk to you about health and safety. But they can also say, screw off, get away from here. And we're not actually allowed to enter. We are allowed to enter any other workplace at any other time, but homes are sacrosanct. But what we found is that people were abusing this and saying, oh, my worker is sitting at home today, so I'm going to be abusive to them via Zoom. And that's okay because their OSHA doesn't apply to someone sitting at home. So that is not whatever the intent of OSHA was, or the protection from being harassed. So we've made it clear that regardless of where someone is sitting, if they're sitting at home or they're sitting in a coffee shop, harassment is unacceptable. You cannot harass virtually, and you will have to do an investigation. If I hear that there's been a complaint about, John harassed Susie over Zoom or Microsoft Teams, we're going to say, did you investigate it? What did you do? Could I see that investigation? So that's something that's really important. But what's also important is people have been a bit misunderstanding from the news releases. Oh, what now? OSHA applies inside the house. Inspectors are coming into my house. They're going to inspect my physical workplace. No, just for absolute clarity in this call, we're not, there's no change to that. The home is still something we do not have authority to enter without you inviting us in. This is just solely to do with like Microsoft Teams, Zoom, all the other ways you might communicate. If there's harassment, you cannot harass, you have to investigate. As well, we are going to be looking a little deeper, and we're going to be doing a consultation. It hasn't started yet, to look at potential legislative or regulatory changes with regards to what to do when harassment has occurred in your workplace. Right now, we say have a policy, have a program, investigate, but we don't say what to do if the investigation says it's happened. So we are going to be exploring and working with workplaces to say, what could that look like if we were to add some new requirement on what you do? Okay, so there's lots more information here. I won't go through it all. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for the invite. And now I'd really like to turn it over to questions if people have any questions.
Thank you so much, Jules. That was so insightful. I know most of you know majority of the compliance requirement, but to hear it from you in detail with, what is mandatory, what is the obligation, what are you looking at, it definitely helps just to put that solid understanding back to all the employers and those of you who have joined today. Just kind of step back and look at what you have for health and safety and what are some opportunities. I think there is a message in chat. So what we are going to be doing in terms of sharing the slide deck is we are going to be through ORHMA newsletters. We are going to be actually sending the links for the tips and tools that you have available. So this way, that's one of the things that ORHMA has asked is have a health and safety corner where they can continuously share information about upcoming stuff, changes to legislation, as well as any kind of tips and tools that would be beneficial for the members. So definitely we'll take all these links and share that with all of you, and we will email you those links as well. Any questions at this point?
I don't bite. You don't need to be afraid. It's a safe space.
It's a smaller group, so please feel free to ask questions so that you can get clarity. It is a great advantage for us to have Jules this morning, so take advantage of his time and ask him the questions where you do need some clarity. There are a few things I do want to bring it up to all of you. There are a few mandatory policies and procedures. So to sum up compliance, if you have 5 or more employees regularly employed in a workplace, you do need to have a written health and safety program in place, which includes doing a hazard assessment based on all the various tasks that's performed at the workplace, writing policies. So doing a hazard assessment, writing the policies and procedures to mitigate those risks. And then you are obligated to do regular workplace inspection. At least parts of the workplace have to be inspected. So if you are a hotel and it is a large hotel, you may not be able to do all areas of the hotel. So you can even break down the various different floors that you would be doing at different months. But workplace inspection is a must. It have to be documented. If you have 5 or more employees, you do need to have a dedicated safety lab who is not a supervisor or a manager. But if you have more than 20 employees regularly employed, which includes part-timers, to your head count, then you need to have a joint health and safety committee. Along with that mandatory training, WMS, workplace violence and harassment, your basic duties and responsibilities under the Occupational Health and Safety Act for employees as well as supervisors. These are the 3 mandatory stuff in relation to health and safety. Over and above that is AODA. Jules, can you expand a little bit more on some of these areas I touched? Because these are the basic compliance, and I want to make sure all of them understands that.
Yeah, no, happy to do that. And yeah, like a key thing for me is like we're going to be looking at these policies and programs, but a key thing is not like not just what's on paper. We're going to be asking questions to see if it's real. So obviously it's very important that you have a policy and program in place, but I'll be honest, I'm not an inspector anymore, but years ago I was. You could just print something off the internet. Who even knows where you got it from? And then you post it up on the wall. So I'm going to be asking questions to see if the program you have in place, and the program is what that means for us is what do you actually set up in your workplace to control the hazards that are relevant to your workplace? We're going to be asking questions of supervisors, of the employer. And basically, if you can't answer those questions appropriately, we might be still writing an order to put a program in place. Even though you've got this written program, we're going to be asking you, well, I asked you a bunch of questions about chemicals, you couldn't answer any of them. So an order might still come. So we're looking for meaningful, real health and safety programs being in place. And I think that's important. It's not just a paper exercise. The paper is not there to put like burden on you. Oh, we just love to make paperwork. The paperwork, the requirement to have a written policy is to focus you on the fact, I got to dig into this. I got to think about this from my workplace. What hazards do I have and what do I have to have in place? And so, yes, putting it down pen to paper is important, but what's even more important is that it's real. And so that's going to come through questions. The same thing can happen with questions on training. So you may say, yep, all my workers are trained in WMIS, and here's the training record. I'm going to go, oh, that's great. Hey, John, tell me about what a safety data sheet is. And if they're like, I've never heard of a safety data sheet, or tell me like, how do you work safely with this bottle of chemicals you're working with? And I see they've got no gloves on, they've got no safety glasses, and they don't even know how to explain to me what they would have to be required. I might be writing an order, everyone to be trained in WMIS, right? And you'll be like, but I showed you the paper that showed they were trained. It's not the training or the records, it's the reality of it. The knowledge is what's important. So that's something I need you to think about as well. And that's why we ask people yearly to relook at their program to say, is our program working? Like, how do you measure whether it's working? How do you know people are still up to speed on what they need to know? Has something changed in your workplace since last year? You're doing a new business line and now a new hazard has been introduced. Things like that. You need to think about all of those things with regards to that. The other thing I want to speak about which is we haven't spoken about today, is temp workers. We do know a lot of your sector, you may use temp workers. Perfectly fine. Temp workers are a legitimate way to fill like staffing shortfalls or to do certain jobs. No problem with that. But do think you might have, or you will have, sorry, some responsibility for their health and safety as well. There's a misconception sometimes out there that if I hire company ABC, all on them. I don't need to worry about it. The risk is now on ABC company. We actually hold both employers jointly responsible. So I will ask ABC company, the temp agency, how did you train your workers? All of that basic training, awareness training, and all of that. But then I'm going to turn to you in your hotel or your restaurant and say, they're physically in your control. The hazards are your hazards. How did you make sure they were safe? And so we could actually go after, write orders to both, prosecute both, and we have done that. So I think that's an important thing, is that you still need to think about if they're on your premises and they're doing work for you, you need to work with the temp agency to figure out how they're going to be trained, how they're going to be safe. And that can be you require the temp agency to do all the women's training, but you need to actually have a process where that's been checked, right? Like, how do you know they're coming with the appropriate training? So temp agency is a key thing. And that's why I also want to flag, and this is on my colleagues on the employment standard side, but as of this July, all temp agencies in Ontario now must be licensed. This is a brand new, we don't normally license businesses. You just get to, sign up with the government, you do your business license, and there you are, you're a business. You don't have to come to the ministry for approval. But for temp agencies, they must be licensed. All licensed temp agencies are online on our list. So if you're using temp agencies, you need to check the list. You cannot use, and so we will prosecute employers who use non-licensed temp agencies. We'll also prosecute that temp agency for not getting licensed, but something to think about. We've been seeing a lot of abuse in this sector. Again, not as much on the health safety side, but that has been a concern. We do see safety concerns, but on the no one's being paid proper wages, all these other issues. So really pay attention if you're using temp agencies and how they fit into your workplace and how you keep them safe. The other one, just quickly on policies and procedures, is where we see a lot of weakness, and it's relevant to your sector, is really on the investigations of harassment complaints. They're on the rise, and we're seeing they're being very flippantly treated, and people are just ignoring them. Half the time we show up and they're like, "Oh, I just ignored that complaint. It was BS or whatever." You really need to cover your ass and look into it. Like, you need to say, and like I said, you can look into it and say, I didn't have any grounds, there was no merit to it, that's okay. But we're going to require you to do an investigation. Investigation, importantly, does not mean a third party. I don't require you to go pay thousands of dollars to a law firm. And there are law firms out there who will charge you happily thousands of dollars. We're saying you can look into it yourself, but it needs to be a legitimate investigation. We see that often not done. The one case we can order a third party to do it as well. That's going to be in cases in, let's say, like a small business. Like, if it's my business, I'm the employer, I have 3 employees, and they say Jules is the harasser. Well, Jules can't legitimately do the investigation because if I'm the one accused of harassment. So think about that too, like, who's doing the investigation. Please do not have the supervisor doing the investigation if they're the one who's been accused of the harassment. You're going to need to have somebody else do it. If you don't have anybody else, that you might need to think about a third party. So, but we are going to expect that, and that's a real weakness, and it's on the rise. The other thing is dealing with work refusals properly. We're seeing a lot of mistakes with that, is that we actually don't want the ministry to have to be involved. We want it to have an internal resolution if possible. And both parties, sometimes the worker, they call straight to us. And the first question I'm going to ask is, did you even go to your supervisor about this? But the second thing is the supervisor just ignoring it when the complaint happens. You really need to investigate it, even if you think there's no merit to the thing. Look into it and see, what is it? Why are they worried? Is there a gap I hadn't thought of possibly? The workers being on the front line might have an access to the hazard and an insight to the hazard you've missed. And so that's why we really protect that right to refuse. You've got to look into it. And we want, hopefully, for you to be able to resolve it. Either show them that, oh, it isn't a hazard, here's why, or alternatively, you're right. You do need a pair of gloves. I'm going to get that for you. Or you do need safety glasses. I'll get that for you. Or you do need some training. I'll get that for you, and resolve it in the workplace. If not, we're always there to come in and mediate and investigate. But those get, I guess I call them botched work refusals all the time. So really encourage you to understand the work refusal process.
Thank you so much, Joel, no, for giving us more clarity on some of the topics that everybody needs further clarification on. So we really, really appreciate it. I know as employers, all of you have the obligation to report injuries and illnesses. That's a completely another topic that we can expand and explain for the next 15-20 minutes. Considering that it is 9:29, I do want to to ask one more time, if any of the participants have any other questions, you could definitely put it on chat so that we can definitely try to answer that for you. One of the initiatives that ORHMA definitely wants to take is take more information out to you that is relevant for the hospitality sector. So that common types of injuries and illnesses, what are some prevention strategies, prevention tips, new updates on legislations, training, what kind of training. Again, when we talk about training, it's another topic that we can sit here and expand on. Women's training is one of the common ones that in the hospitality sector, a lot of people don't understand. Women's needs to be reviewed on a yearly basis, especially with workplace specific chemicals and hazards that are in the workplace relevant to women's. Jules, do you have anything to add very quickly on that before we wrap up the session?
I don't know if I have much more to add on that, to be honest. Like it's just yeah, I mean, like basically the OSHA just is setting that bare minimum stuff, and I just encourage people to go to organizations like 4S for that help and support. And that's one thing, and maybe I'll just finish on this as a last thought, is that you may feel frustrated by after a visit with an inspector because you're saying they didn't tell me how to solve my problem. And that's because legally we can't. We're not trying to be jerks or mean. Me previously being a health and safety coordinator in the private sector, my job was to solve your problems. I would go into a workplace and they had to kind of beat that out of me as an inspector because our role is to only explain the law and explain compliance. And so we will often write the order and you might say, but how do I comply? We're not trying to be mean that we can't. We're just not actually legally authorized to do that, even if we could provide you pointers. That's why we really do encourage this idea of going to the system, going to organizations like 4S. No matter what the issue is, they can get you pointed in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Jules. And with that, all of you, thank you very much for joining us. Please visit ORHMA's website for any kind of support you need. There are some specials that they have put out for health and safety. So if you have any further questions, do reach out to us. Thank you, all of you. And Jules, thank you so much for your valuable time this morning.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you. You have yourself a safe and an awesome day. Bye for now.